Well, hello and welcome to a Talk Wildlife special. This is basically going to be about introducing you to Kruger National Park in South Africa, how to make the most of your safaris there, what to look for and where to look for it. So I'm delighted to have with me Robert Wienand from Outlook Safaris. I know Robert because I've been on a few safaris with Outlook, and Robert was kind enough to come out and spend a day with us doing just specifically birds. So first of all, hi Robert, how are you?
Hi Alan, thanks for having me. It's great to be chatting online, and yeah, what a privilege to be able to share in this day and age over online facilities or platforms like this. I'm doing well, desperately looking forward to getting back into the bush, but making the most of the lockdown.
Yeah, and of course we are in Kruger. You've got this fantastic picture of a couple of lion in the background. I've got a picture, I think it was taken from Crocodile Bridge, I can't remember. And I do keep looking around to see if it's there. It's actually not there, so I should remember that. So I think what we'll do is, because a lot of people that watch Talk Wildlife interviews and videos will be people that would like to go on safari. And I think one of the most accessible, and certainly for me, one of the best reserves in the world is Kruger National Park. It's something that triggered me off being into wildlife. I went there with a school when I was a kid, and it had a lasting effect on me. I'm now in my late 30s, and it's not that funny. So I'm now in my late 30s, and it still stays with me. Bumping into an impala inside the camp will just remain with me for life. And of course, we've been out on safari with you guys a few times and had a fantastic time. And so that's why I wanted specifically to introduce the Kruger, because it's very close to my heart. And I think it is a very accessible and very safe sort of national park. So first of all, what I'll do is I'm going to share screen just so we can have a look at a few pictures around where Kruger is. So if you just bear with me a second, I'll do that. Right, so now hopefully you should be able to see my screen as well.
Yes.
Still there? Yeah, good. Okay, so Kruger Park, I'll introduce it at this level, and then when we start drilling down to where it is, I'll let you take over. So Kruger Park is in South Africa. It takes up a huge chunk of South Africa. I don't quite know the actual, landmass, but maybe Robert will know. So it's, as I always quote, an area of land as big as Wales, and it is basically just this fenced off wilderness. It's an absolutely exceptional place, and you can see that it's just sort of in the, what's that now called? That used to be Transvaal.
It's now called Mpumalanga, which is the northeastern parts of South Africa. Right.
Okay. So maybe if I'd have pressed that, it might have shown me. Right. Okay. So yeah, if you take over and just give us an idea of sort of about the park and where it's positioned, how far it is away from the likes of Johannesburg and Pretoria.
Sure. Yeah. So if you have a look at the screenshot there, you can obviously see the green area, which encompasses the Kruger Park. Most people that would be coming to visit the park would fly into Johannesburg. Some obviously go to Cape Town first. But from Pretoria, for reference sake, Johannesburg would be situated just south of where you see Pretoria there. And the drive from there to the park is going to take you about 4.5 hours to the southern boundary. And then obviously a little longer if you were to venture north. So the park, as you see it, if you look at it, in relation to South Africa, it's in the very northeastern parts of South Africa, and just to the east of the Kruger Park you have Mozambique. So Mozambique forms the eastern boundary of the park, and then directly to the north would be Zimbabwe, and then to the western side you have various homelands and private reserves as you come further south along the boundary, the eastern boundary.
Right, and just because you mentioned Cape Town, just to put it into context, it's 4.5 hours-ish from sort of Pretoria and Johannesburg area. But if you did fly into Cape Town, then you certainly wouldn't be driving it in a few hours, would you? So do you know roughly how long it'd take to drive from Cape Town to Kruger, just so people have got an idea?
You're going to be looking at close on 20 hours. Just the drive between Cape Town and Johannesburg is around 15 hours. You're covering about 1,400 kilometers between Johannesburg and Cape Town. And then obviously you've got that 4 hours plus or minus between Johannesburg to get to the park. So ideally you would want to be flying unless you really had time on hand to explore the country.
Yeah, and there's also now, there's an airport at Kruger, isn't there, you can fly into?
Yeah, so if you have a look at the map there, you'll see just to the south western corner, there's a town called Nelspruit. Nelspruit now has an international airport called the Kruger Mpumalanga International Airport. It hasn't been open that long, but it's gaining in popularity. So there's more and more people that fly in there. So there is that option if you're not a person that enjoys spending too much time on the road, or if you got limited time to visit the park, then it would be good to fly into that airport, and then it's less than a half an hour to your closest entry gate to the park.
Yeah, and also what I was going to say is if you fly into the airport, I haven't flown into the airport, but we did a pickup there when we were actually with you guys, and we had a chance to actually wander into the airport. If it was somebody's first introduction to South Africa and they actually turned up at that airport, it is absolutely magnificent. It basically sets you up brilliantly for Kruger. It is very, very South African, you know. It's a wonderful, wonderful airport. So if you're going to fly in, that's a really good place to fly into. Right, so just before I move on to the actual sort of the different sort of zones of habitat and stuff like that within the park, just want to mention that clearly if you're flying from sort of Britain into the Kruger or anywhere in South Africa, there's no jet lag. You're talking about a 1 or a 2 hour time difference, so there's no jet lag. Clearly, wherever you go, either sort of east or west, you're going to start sort of, you know, adding on hours. But certainly, if you're flying from the UK, there's no jet lag. It's a 2 hour, and you can fly overnight, and the next morning be there. It's brilliant. Right. So the park itself. So this is just a Google Maps satellite image of Kruger Park, and it's basically just that sort of big greeny grey landmass that you can see there. But if you just give us, because again, you know, Kruger is a huge place. So if you start in the north, if you just give us an idea coming down from the north down to the south of what the different habitat zones and things like that are.
Sure. So in the very northern parts of the park, that would be the area bordering the Zimbabwe. We have the Limpopo River, which forms the northern border. So you've got very beautiful riverine vegetation along the river. And then as you move south of that, you have more mixed vegetation. You would get some scattered marula trees and open savanna areas. The northern part of the park is specifically known for the baobab trees. So baobab trees are those very big trees some people may be familiar with. If you wanted to see those in the park, that would be where you'd go. And then as you come down from that part, you first go through open savanna grasslands. As you get closer to riverbeds and the bigger rivers, you'd get nice tall jackalberry trees. And then you start entering what we call our Mopani bushveld. Mopani bushveld, which we could probably touch on at a later stage as well and show some images. It becomes quite a dominant bush or shrub. In some areas, they become quite tall trees. In the central and southern part, not going too far south, but central part of the park is dominated by these Mopani trees. They limit the type of animals you would typically find there. And then when you come further south, you start getting open savanna areas again. Some people, I think, often when there's documentaries shown, it's often of places like the Serengeti, East Africa, where you get these vast open plains. Kruger Park doesn't really have those vast open plains, but the closest you're going to get to that is when you come down into an area called Satara. So it's just south of the central area of the park. You're going to have these beautiful open grassland savannas, scattered knobthorn acacia trees, the marula trees, which are great for various reasons, and we can discuss that at a later stage. And then as you start coming further south, as you can see on the map there, you'll see Sabi Park, Skukuza. You're getting a lot more dense vegetation in this area. If you keep to the eastern side of the park, you'll see, when you look at this actual image, the lighter area quite close to the Mozambique border. That is also a more open grass and savanna area. And as you come further west through the park, you get very dense vegetation, which would be typical or suitable for certain species. And then further west to the actual western boundary of the park, you get silver cluster leaves. So the vegetation there takes on a complete different change. And a lot of rivers flowing through the southern area, a lot more diversity of vegetation zones and species in the southern area. So typically the southern area would be the area that most people would visit, not only because it's close to Johannesburg, or it's the closest part to visit, but also because of the diversity of species in that particular area when you compare it to the rest of the Kruger Park.
Yeah. And there's a number of parks spread, a number of camps spread through the park, and I'm going to talk about a couple. This one, this is Pretorius Cop. The last time we went, we stayed here, and we stayed in not just one of them, we stayed in all of them. There was 5 of us, and we had this little enclosed off area all to ourselves. So the one on the right is a bedroom area with ensuite. The 2 on the left are bedroom areas ensuite, and the one in the middle is a kitchen, our own kitchen with a barbecue area. It was outstanding. I mean, we were cut off from the rest of the camp, and it was as if we had our own camp. It was amazing. We also had that view, so that's one of the bedrooms, and it looks basically, that fence that you can see there is basically where the wild part of the park starts. And we had elephant walking past there. We had various different types of antelope. It was amazing. The birds were fantastic. Another one that we stayed in was Skukuza. This is a rondavel. So rondavel's a sort of round house with a thatched roof. Skukuza, amazing place. This was the view over the river at Skukuza from the terrace by the cafe. So an amazing area. So that's a couple of the camps that we stayed in. We also stayed in Bergendal, which is the older of the camps. And we stayed there in sort of what was in effect sort of like a brick bungalow. But could you give us, Robert, just a quick overview of sort of the camps and the facilities and, just the types of camps that you can actually be looking at spread through the park?
Yeah, sure. So most of the park accommodation was based on the circular rondavel image architecture, if you want to call it that. And over the years, as new camps were added on, there was a change made to the building shape. Each camp generally has varying accommodation of varying standards. So you will have in the north, you have Punda Maria, which is the most northerly camp, and there you'd actually have what they did in the past, or with the first edition of accommodation in Punda Maria. They actually had, it was almost like a dormitory, and they had rooms added to each other. So you still have that, and they have over the time added what they call safari tents, which are now separated from the fixed buildings. So some people would prefer the more safari style tenting accommodation. In some parts, you may have those tents actually slightly elevated to give you a view over a river. If you come south to Willifant's camp, for instance, you've got a lot of these rondavel-shaped rooms, bungalows, and Willifants are situated quite high up, overlooking the Willifants River, and then they are set in sort of rows, one behind the other. Satara, you've got the same structure again, but they're all in these circles, which would kind of make a person think of the old days when in South Africa, I'm referring to in particular, when people used to bring all the ox wagons into a circle, and that was sort of the way to keep things safe. But the accommodation is typically very similar as you go through the camp. It's just the locality is different, and then the type of luxury that you would like or ideally want in your accommodation can also be chosen depending on where you are. So I'm not sure if that has sort of given you an idea or covered your question.
Yeah, it has, and the rooms are all really clean. They're looked after. You're not when you go on a safari in Kruger, if you stay in something like a rondavel or one of the bungalows that we stayed in, you're not particularly roughing it as such, because you are well looked after both by the organisers of the safari, in this case it was Outlook, or by the camp itself, the actual people that work for Kruger Park. It's a great place. And just to add to that as well, that there are things like cafes and shops in the camps, in some of the camps, and the obligatory sort of tourist trap where you go and buy all your tourist goodies to bring back with you. But they are really good. I mean, Skakusa's the biggest. And do you know, Robert, how big Skakusa is? Do you know roughly? Size-wise, I'm not 100% sure. As far as Skakusa's actually just recently added a new hotel, so that can accommodate a certain amount of people. I'm not sure exactly how many, but Skakusa is the largest camp in the Kruger National Park, and it's the only camp in the park that has a post office and banks that people can visit if they had to. There's an airport. We were just talking about people flying in closer to the park, so you can actually fly into Skakusa camp as well if you wanted to. There's a 9-hole golf course just outside, and it actually has its own sort of residential area where the staff from the camp would stay. So it's quite a big camp. Once you're inside the camp and once you're at your room, you wouldn't necessarily get this feeling of it being a very big camp. But it is sometimes one of the camps people that have been to the park previously would typically try and look for the smaller camps. But as your image there shows, the Skakusa has the Sabi River flowing past it. So you've got this wonderful lookout over the river. Often have hippos and elephants and buffalo come down to the river. So it is a great camp. There's various wildlife that you can actually encounter within the camp as well. So it is fairly big, but it still has that ideal feel for being in the bush, which people would typically want when visiting the park. Yeah, and I can echo that. I mean, at the end of the day, as busy as Skakusa gets, even if it's full, you don't see that many people other than at sort of hubs like the cafe and things like that. I bird watched around the camp all the time when I was there. You don't bump into a lot of people, and when you go out into the park itself, people just disappear because, and unless there's an attraction like a lion kill or something like that, you don't really see that many people. But I can vouch for the wildlife because just off that particular outlook there, I had hippo. In fact, just if you see this sort of wooden path that comes down towards the left, I walked down there on a morning. I was on my own. There was nobody out. It was crack of dawn, and I saw a hippo mother with its baby. I've got photos to prove it, which we'll show on another episode. And also I had, now then, I've got to get this right. Was it Cape short-toed otter, or is that right? I can't remember. What's the species of otter that you get there?
Yes, it's you get the clawless otter and you get the spotted-necked otter.
Yeah, it was the clawless. Yeah. So I got a clawless on my first morning from that bridge just over there, and just about 200 yards away on the same side of the river. The first night we got there was a herd of elephant actually feeding on this side of the river. I mean, they were so close you could smell them. It was just unbelievable. So you are absolutely enveloped in, wildlife wherever you go in Kruger. It's amazing, even at the biggest camp. And you get bush babies in the camp, you get deer and you get mongooses. It's brilliant. So just to prove that you do have to sort of share it with residents, this one was actually at Pretorius Cop, and this was a regular visitor, or these were regular visitors. So do you want to talk us through these pictures as I flick through them, Robert?
So this particular image is obviously, that's a Cape Glossy starling, very common throughout the park. And as one would imagine, in a nature area the size of the Kruger Park, and with all the wildlife that's around, any sort of food that's made available, you are going to have various species attracted to that food. So starlings are particularly abundant in the parks, around the restaurants, around the public areas, and monkeys, as a person can imagine, can also become quite a bit of a pest. There we have a female bushbuck. They also enter the camps. A lot of them are actually species that have been in the camps for several years, and they stay in the camp. They're not a threat to anybody. A lot of people may think, well, then you're going to get dangerous animals coming into the camp. It does occasionally occur, but the fences around the camps are electrified, so typically your predators would not be coming into the camps. And I think these animals, like this bushbuck, become quite tame because they get used to the movement of people in the camps, and it's an area where they feel pretty safe as well.
Yeah, and I think, echoing what you said about dangerous animals, I think the only animals the Brick Wall tells us that this is actually Bergendal. The only animals that I saw in there when I was walking around bird watching that I would be a bit wary of were the baboons. There was actually baboons inside the park, which, as long as you're careful and you stay away from them, they're not going to sort of do anything that's going to harm you. That's the impression I got, because I didn't go too close, but I did see them within probably about 150 yards inside the camp.
Yeah, so the baboons you'll find in many parts of the park. Those are vervet monkeys there, the most common species that we'll get in the park, and they have become quite habituated to the camps and people, and a person certainly has to be cautious when you've got food around. Especially the dominant males won't hesitate to come and steal food. You can often see them at dustbins where people have thrown whatever packets or food or whatever they've got. They may be rummaging through those dustbins, but mostly, if you leave them alone and if you are sensible about your movements and not openly walking around with food, you can enjoy seeing these or watching these species without there ever being any conflict.
Yeah, I sat on a bench on that same path where I saw the hippo. At the end of that bench, at the end of that path is a bench. I sat there. These guys were just completely ignoring me. I've got a sort of photo essay of them actually taking litter out the bin, which I use in my talk. But yeah, it got to the stage where one actually was sat on the other end of the bench from me, and they had no problem, even though that was a family group. There was no real threat, and as long as you're sensible, it's fine.
Yes, agree, and that goes for all the animals in the park. That's quite a nice shot there of epilated fruit bats. They've got that sort of cute dog-like face, which people enjoy about bats, not the typical look. So these bats are quite common throughout the park. They have a very typical metallic clinging sound that you can hear at night time. And as the name suggests, that they are fruit bats, so they'd be feeding on figs and various fruit trees in the camps. And these like roosting underneath the roofs of the various bungalows, the shops, everywhere where you've got the thatch roofing. that's a great place for them to roost.
Yeah, that particular one was Skukuza. We sat under them. They're amazing just to watch during the day because they're there, obviously, you know, the whole of the day, and that's just a few of them. There's a lot of them, and they're great. And then, yeah, the hardy-dar, myself to what was left of the barbecue, and the barbecue's not on, just so you know, so it's not getting toasted feet.
Yeah, so we have these barbecues. As you would refer to them in South Africa, we call it a braai.
Yeah.
South Africans love having their braai outside, and when you're in the bush, you want to enjoy the bush, you want to enjoy the sounds of nature. So we enjoy making a fire and cooking the meat outside, and it also attracts various animals and species, and sometimes you can even do your breakfast out there. So this hardy-dar, I'm not sure if it was looking for anything in particular there, but you would have starlings and various other species, squirrels, sometimes mongooses, various bird species, hopefully trying to, well, for them, hopefully looking for any bits of meat or whatever food may still be left on the grill to feed on.
Yeah, and this hardy-dar ibis. This is basically one of the sounds of Skukuza. You're going to be woken up every morning by these guys. There's a lot of them, and they're loud, and it's a brilliant way to wake up on a morning. Yeah,
hardy-dars, very noisy, very vocal, but always a good species to have around.
Yeah, well, it's a sound of Africa, isn't it? So, you know, they're great to see. I mean, you know, you can't sort of go to Kruger and then complain that you're woken up by a hardy-dar. You expect to be, and if you're not, you're almost put out. It's like, why not? They're amazing things. So, right, okay, so we this 10-minute introduction that we talked about is now nearly 30 minutes, so that's that's great. But I'm hoping that, you know, it gave people a really good introduction to Kruger itself. What we'll do on the next episode is we'll talk about how to make the most of your safari in anywhere really, but in Kruger in particular. So Robert, for now, thanks a lot. I will speak to you very, very shortly to put the next episode together. So thanks again. See you soon.
Thanks, Allan. Appreciate it. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.